Snow White is one of the most quietly tragic characters in The Wolf Among Us. And not because she wants power and not because she lacks compassion, but because she genuinely believes in systems. She believes rules exist to protect people. She believes structure can create fairness. And at the beginning of the game, that belief is what makes her so easy to trust and to root for. But tragedy doesn't always turn people cruel. Sometimes it just makes them rigid. Snow begins the story with empathy and understanding that people are messy, desperate, and often failed by the world that they live in. What changes over time isn't her desire for justice, but her faith in people themselves. As trauma piles up, sympathy begins to feel dangerous. Flexibility starts to look like weakness, and control becomes the only thing she feels she can rely on. That's what makes Snow White tragic. Not that she wants change, but that the very things meant to make her stronger slowly push her towards a version of justice that leaves no room for mercy. To understand how that happens, we have to start with who Snow White is before everything breaks, when she still believes the system can be better, and when she still believes the people inside are worth trusting. The first time we truly see who Snow White is beneath the composure happens in the back of the taxi with Bigby. After witnessing how dire things had become for the Fables outside of the Woodlands, Snow admits something uncomfortable. She didn't fully understand how bad it had gotten. People without glamours, people turning to prostitution just to survive, people living in dangerous conditions the system was never designed to protect, conditions that ultimately led to a Fable being murdered. What troubles Snow the most isn't just the suffering itself, it's what it reveals about the system she helps run. She reflects on how help in Fabletown isn't distributed fairly. Someone like Bluebeard asks for assistance through back channels, and help arrives immediately. But when lower-class Fables do everything right, they follow the rules, fill out the forms, ask through official means, they're ignored. Snow recognizes the classism baked into the system, and she questions her own role in maintaining it. This moment isn't about guilt, but rather it's about responsibility. Bigby encourages Snow to try to make change from within, to fix what's broken rather than abandon it, and Snow listens. That belief from Bigby directly informs how she will behave next. Later in the game, when Snow has to tell Holly that her sister Lily is dead, she approaches the moment with care and restraint. She returns Lily's pin, which at the moment is a technical violation and isn't by the books or by the rules. Technically, Lily's body is still technically an ongoing crime scene, but Snow violating and bending that rule to give Holly something that she clearly was fond of shows that she is willing to redirect her attention away from the elites of the Woodlands and towards the people of Fabletown that she has consistently failed. At this point in the story, Snow still believes in empathy and authority can coexist, and that belief is about to be tested. Lily's funeral represents the cleanest version of who Snow White is when her values and authority are aligned. Up to this point, The Wolf Among Us makes it clear how inaccessible Fabletown's institutions are to lower-class Fables. Holly's companion Grendel can't even gain access to the Woodlands to report Lily missing. The doors, in a lot of ways, just stay closed. The system doesn't listen. And by the time anyone pays attention, it's already too late. And that's what happened with Lily. So when Snow organized Lily's funeral, it isn't out of obligation or political necessity. It's an act of moral leadership, even without Lily's body. After Crane selfishly disposed of it, Snow refuses to let that failure be the final word. Grief still matters. Dignity still matters. Snow delivers the eulogy herself, not as a bureaucrat, but as somebody willing to stand beside those the system failed. For a brief moment, Snow succeeds in undoing the class divide, poisoning Fabletown from the inside. And that moment matters because it proves Snow isn't naive or even performative. She knows the system is broken, she just believes it can be better. Which is why what follows doesn't feel like a total contradiction, but it feels like a fracture. Snow White doesn't change because of one traumatic moment. She changes because several violations of trust happen all at once. That process begins when Snow is forced to look at a body glamored to look exactly like her own. The horror isn't just that another Fable has been murdered, but it's the implication that someone may have died because they were mistaken for her. Snow never consented to this. The glamour is illegal, and it's sourced through the black market channels that exist precisely because the system is so easy to bypass for those with money or influence. When Bigby tells Snow the truth about Crane and how he was responsible for the illegal glamour, the hooker getting killed, and the fact that the hooker also looked like Snow White, she kind of snaps. The man responsible for enforcing Fabletown's laws was secretly breaking them, exploiting a vulnerable woman, and violating the very rules he demanded others follow. For Snow, this isn't just institutional collapse, but it's very personal. She worked alongside Crane for 15 years. Every interaction now feels poisoned in hindsight. And then comes the final violation. Crane had been stalking her. At that point, Snow loses more faith in leadership. She loses her sense of safety, privacy, and autonomy. The system didn't just fail to protect her, but it enabled the very harm that it caused. This is where Snow's worldview hardens, where institutions protect abusers and punish the vulnerable. Compassion starts to feel reckless, trust feels naive, and control begins to look like the only defense left. Snow doesn't just abandon justice here, but she redefines it. The confrontation with Anti-Greenleaf is where everything Snow has been carrying finally spills over. Greenleaf is the source of the black market glamours that shattered Snow's sense of safety. When Snow arrives, Greenleaf wastes their time using those same glamours, and Snow's impatience feels totally earned here. From a legal standpoint, Snow is within her rights to demand the glamour tree be destroyed. But legality isn't morality. Destroying that tree would take away everything Greenleaf has. Her job, her life, and everything that reminds her of the past. It would also devastate those lower-class fables who rely on those glamours to survive. Because, again, that classism of the glamours being expensive forces people to get creative because of the enforcement. The same people Snow once bent the rules to help would now be getting hurt if she destroyed the tree. And this is the real tragedy of this scene. Snow retreats into rigidity. Enforcement replaces empathy. Control replaces flexibility. And while that choice makes sense given everything she's endured to this point, it doesn't stay contained, and it becomes her new baseline. By the end of the game, Snow sends Toad and his son to the farm despite knowing that the system failed them. She was willing to do the same to Colin as well, not because it's kind or compassionate, but because it's what the rules demand. Snow doesn't become violent, she doesn't become a villain, she becomes something quieter and more tragic. Like Harvey Dent in the Batman series, Snow begins as an idealist who believes change can come from within. And like Dent, trauma doesn't erase that belief, but it distorts it. Where Dent turns to violence, Snow turns to procedure. Where he flips a coin, she signs orders. Snow White doesn't lose her morals, but she loses her faith in people, and that's the real tragedy at the end of the day. Snow White is a tragic character, not because she fails to see what's wrong with Fabletown, but because she sees it too clearly and loses faith in the people meant to fix it. She starts believing compassion and authority can coexist, but as trauma piles up, justice narrows. Rules become safer than people, and control becomes easier than mercy. Snow never becomes a villain, she simply retreats into structure, enforcing a system she once tried to reform, because it's the only thing that still feels stable. That's not a flaw in her character, that's the real tragedy of Snow White. I hope you guys enjoyed the real tragedy of Snow White, and if you guys enjoyed it, I would love to hear what your thoughts are in the comments section down below. If you want more character analysis, please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.